to Fright Night.
And welcome to Deconstructing, where I take apart an iconic horror movie to find out what makes it tick. Back in 1985, it seemed like vampire movies just weren't in fashion anymore. But writer-director Tom Holland changed all that with one of the best modern vampire movies ever made. That blend of high school romantic comedy and old school gothic horror helped usher in a new wave of crowd-pleasing horror flicks that played off the genre's classic tropes while spicing up the old recipe with groundbreaking practical effects. Decades later, it's become a cult classic, spanning generations of fans, and Holland has since established himself as one of the all-time masters of horror. As always, we're taking a three-part approach. With Origin, we'll trace the movie's path from original concept to critical and box office success. In Legacy, we'll see how that success impacted fans and filmmakers. And through Mystery, I'll pick out some interesting bits of trivia and hopefully answer some of your burning questions. So grab some holy water and start sharpening your steak, because today we're deconstructing Tom Holland's original Fright Night. After starting out in showbiz as an actor, Tom Holland quickly found success as a screenwriter, with hits like Psycho 2 and Class of 1984. After seeing his script Scream for Help turned into a critical and box office disaster, he decided to write a story that he could direct himself. Columbia Pictures bought the screenplay, but they were reluctant to hand over a large budget to a first-time director. So they spent less on Fright Night than any other film that year. The upside for Holland was the studio basically left him alone to make the film he wanted to make. The idea began with a theme he introduced in Scream for Help. A teenager tries to convince their friends, family, and the police that someone they know is a serial killer, someone who discovers they've been identified and plans to eliminate the witness. But Holland took the idea a step further. What if the killer was a vampire? At first, he couldn't quite find a way to make it work, until he hit on the perfect hook. What if the kid goes to Vincent Price for help? Like the real Vincent Price?
Very little hope, I assure you.
Unfortunately, the horror icon had decided to leave his horror roles behind him, but Holland had previously worked with Roddy McDowall in Class of 1984, so he then offered him the part, and he jumped at the opportunity, even coming up with a detailed backstory for his character, whose name, Peter Vincent, combines the name of Vincent Price and his fellow horror icon, Peter Cushing. Next came casting the vampire himself. Chris Sarandon had a rough experience filming 1977's The Sentinel, and was afraid to do another horror film. That is, until he read the script, which he envisioned as a love triangle in which one of the characters happens to be a monster. He not only added more romantic aspects to his character, he also wanted Jerry to have some respect for Charlie Brewster, making him reluctant to kill him until it becomes necessary. Drawing on his own background as an actor, Holland had the leads rehearse the entire movie like a stage play, but gave them freedom to give their characters more depth and history. In turn, his skills as a writer enabled him to plan out every scene in his head before shooting a single frame of film, so what you see on screen is very close to Holland's vision. That vision was also enhanced by the makeup effects wizardry of Richard Edlund, who had just completed work on Ghostbusters. Since Fright Night was intended to be rated R, he was able to create more gruesome effects. The end result was the perfect blend of character-driven comedy, romantic drama, and all-out horror. As I mentioned earlier, Fright Night was a surprise hit for Columbia, and it made back almost 3 times its budget during its run in the late summer of 1985. The little monster movie that the studio once ignored was now prime material for a sequel. Despite the return of William Ragsdale as Charlie and McDowall as Peter Vincent, Fright Night Part 2 didn't quite recapture the success of its predecessor, although it has built up its own cult following over the years. It might have turned out better if Holland had been available, but he'd moved on to another horror classic by then. Of course, the original would get caught up in horror remake mania with a massive budget and big-name stars, but it fell short of the mark. It's a fun film, throwing a few new twists into the plot, and it did well in theaters. But in the end, it's still kind of eh. That film got its own direct-to-video sequel in 2013, but the less said about that one, the better. On the other hand, the original has seen a big surge in popularity. Fright Night has launched tons of licensed merchandise, including a comic book series that lasted from 1988 to 1990, a computer game where the player takes the role of the vampire, and an excellent novelization by notorious splatterpunk authors John Skipp and Craig Spector. Holland had started development on a second sequel in 1989, but that attempt ended in tragedy when studio head Jose Menendez and his wife were murdered by their own sons in what became one of the most high-profile celebrity crime cases of the 90s. Holland is still trying to get a direct sequel off the ground, with most of the main characters returning. He's completed the script under the title Fright Night Resurrection. Keep watch for news on that one. As I said before, Richard Edlund drew on his experience with Ghostbusters special effects to create Vampire Jerry, his henchman Billy Cole, and the extremely creepy transformation and death of Evil Ed. But the connection doesn't end there. This horrific version of Jerry is actually an unused puppet from Ghostbusters. It was originally designed for the librarian scene, but the studio thought it was too scary for a more kid-friendly movie. The film as we know it is very close to Holland's final shooting script, but an earlier draft had a much different ending. Peter Vincent is bitten and becomes a vampire himself, which he then would have revealed to Charlie on TV in the final scene. We all know the iconic image of the fully transformed Amy sporting a huge mouthful of shark-like teeth. It's on all the promotional art and you can see it everywhere on Fright Night merchandise. But the appliance itself, worn by Amanda Bearse, was a last-minute rush job done on the cheap and meant to appear on screen for a couple of seconds. But audiences freaked out over it and it became one of the movie's most remembered moments. Are you as big a Fright Night fan as I am? Do you have more inside info or theories about the movie? Just drop some knowledge in the comments, give us a like, and if you haven't already subscribed, hit the little bell to get lots more JoBlo horror content.
For real.